Well, greetings, Mr. Kolesar's class. Welcome to chemistry. In our first section, we're going to be looking at an introduction to chemistry. A lot of times we like to break down the word chemistry into chem, is, try. And it's going to be putting forth effort on both your part and my part in order to be successful this year in class. So a couple things for Mr. Kolesar's chemistry class we've been talking about and looking at. We'll have a lot of what we call the flipped classroom, where we're going to be watching videos to describe the lecture, and then in class we're going to be allowed more work time, lab time, demos, activities, and other things. So to help us out, you're going to want to maximize your screen to minimize the distractions that can be always on there. Have the volume on, and anytime you want to, pause the video, and anytime you need to rewatch the videos also. So our first section in chemistry, there's a couple key words that we want to look into. Chemistry is going to be one of the key terms for the entire year, study of matter and the changes it undergoes. So then to look at what matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. Another term that we're going to look at is we'll always hear of things called chemicals or substances. Matter that has a definite and uniform composition, meaning that it's the same, would be the idea of uniform. Now, as we look into mass versus weight, that's going to be a description of the matter, and it's going to look at the amount of matter that we have, or how much material we have. Now, mass is independent of gravity, so it doesn't matter where you're at, you have the same amount of mass. Weight, however, reflects the amount of matter, but it's how much gravity pulls on that matter. So the more mass you have, the more weight you would have, but mass does not change, weight does, depending on where you're at. So an example would be is if we had the same person on the Earth as we do on the moon, you would weigh less on the moon because the moon's gravity is about 1/6 that of Earth. So if you were to do a slam dunk contest, you could actually jump a lot higher on the moon than on the Earth. The amount of material, if you counted up all the atoms, would be the same, but the mass would be the same. The weight would be different depending on where you're at. Now, when we look into chemistry, we're going to be looking at different types of observations that we can make. In our observations, we're going to look at macro is going to be the world around us that we see normally. So like you can see a fly flying around the room. However, we're also going to look at microscopic observations. A lot of biology we looked at under the microscope, and so that you could actually zoom in and see a section of the fly wing. And you could zoom in further and see very close up what the fly wing is actually made of. What happens at the microscopic level affects what happens at the macroscopic level. So as we change between those two worlds. In chemistry, we're going to go one step further. We're going to call it the atomic level, which is the sub-microscopic or below the microscopic level. And why we're interested in that is the reactions and the interactions between the atoms at the microscopic level, or excuse me, at the sub-microscopic level or atomic level, affects what happens on each of the levels, the microscopic and the macroscopic. So much of our observations will be taking place at the atomic level and what's happening there. So the structure, composition, behavior of all matter can be explained at the submicroscopic level or the atomic level. All that we observe about matter depends on atoms and the changes they undergo. Chemistry seeks to explain the submicroscopic events leading to macroscopic observations. One way to do this is by models. Models, or a chemical model, is a visual, verbal, or mathematical representation of a submicroscopic event. So things that we can't actually do or represent in everyday life, we are going to use models for. An example from the past, the Bohr model. The Bohr model showed how many protons and neutrons were in a nucleus. Little crash course back from 9th grade science. And then from there we showed that there were a certain number of electrons in one energy level and a certain number of electrons in the next energy level. And by those electrons being placed outside, we could show that elements wanted to either gain or lose electrons to get their full outer shell. So this was the Bohr model, showing electrons orbiting around the sun, much like our planets, much like electrons orbiting around the nucleus. And it was used as a representation of showing how two atoms might connect with each other. It's a good idea, but it's going to be shown to not be quite as correct as we'd like later on. But this introduces us up to section 1.1 in chemistry for this year.